Come on, can you really beat this?
I know.
Let's not go to debate.
I was like, where'd it go?
You good to go? You good? Okay, awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Pretty nice morning here at Paradise Point. My name is Guy Roquart. I'm the co-founder of a company here in California called Papa & Barkley. Papa & Barkley is a California wellness suite of products that includes topicals, tinctures, pain relief patches, capsules, lozenges, chocolate bites, those kinds of products. We have a national CBD product, but most of our products, our core products, are here in California and are mixed ratio. A little bit about myself. I'm a 20-year veteran of the California cannabis industry. I started way back in 1998. I also founded a company in Denver, Colorado, a vape company back in 2011, right when things were getting started there. So lots of deep knowledge, but this particular panel is, I'm just gonna help facilitate the conversation. We have a great panel of, great group of panelists, all with deep understanding of autoimmune diseases and how cannabis works with them. So let me have our panelists introduce themselves first, then we'll go into some discussion topics and eventually open it up to questions, all right? So why don't we start first with Jessie?
Hi, good morning. I am a real estate attorney as my background. About 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with lupus, and at this point I have about 5 or 6 sidecar diseases. It's just the gift that keeps giving. I will probably have to stand a couple of times during this panel because I also recently, 3 months ago, had a 2-part spinal fusion through the front and through the back. Unfortunately, CBD does not cure hardware problems like that. So I started taking cannabis medicinally about 4 years ago when I moved to California, and I was studying for the bar. I was in the middle of doing chemo for my lupus. And also a biologic, which I still do once a month. So I found that the cannabis was helping my appetite, my pain levels, and I started taking CBD. My friend and business partner, Dina, in the front row, has a CBD company, Hemp CBD. And I was ordering more and more of it, and we finally had the idea to do a high dose brand, and so we have launched Mend, which is basically, the tinctures will come in 10,000 milligram bottles, which makes it easy to dose. It's basically a whole plant distillate, and then we add different terpenes and essential oils to kind of round out the array of receptors that we hit.
Great job. Hey everybody, my name is Nicole Davidsohn, and I am the co-founder at EVA. We actually started in the cannabis industry back in 2015, but due to the Santa Rosa fires, which some of you may be familiar with in 2017, we had to transition over into the legal hemp industry. And we use whole flowers in our products, so we don't do any extracts or isolates. We employ the raw acidic cannabinoids, and we make supplements and seasonings. We also have flower powder, which is meant to be infused directly into foods, drinks, and other alternative medicines. I currently am managing ulcerative colitis with my formula Better Relief, and it's turmeric ginger and the flower powder, and it is full of phytocannabinoids, vitamins, minerals, terpenes, everything that's in the plant you can see in the flower is exactly in the flower powder. So I'm here to help other people with autoimmune diseases and that are struggling with something like IBD, because I know it's a terrible, debilitating disease. You can spend weeks in bed, weeks in the hospital, and just to be here today, being able to speak to you is a blessing from the universe, because it's not an easy, autoimmune diseases are not an easy life.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jimmy Castillo. I'm the Chief Innovative Officer for Jenny's Rose. I got into the cannabis industry in 2008. My sister was diagnosed with a 9-pound cyst on her ovary. They took out the ovary, it was benign. She started developing tumors quickly after that. In 2009, my sister moved to to New York to seek experimental treatment, where I seen her suffer from the lack of cannabinoids and not being able to utilize cannabinoids there to help her through her process. I've been working with patients one-on-one for over the last 12 years, trying to learn and understand how our bodies react and receive cannabinoids and cannabinoid therapy. We currently have a documentary out, Ride with Larry, that has over 350 million views with a Parkinson's patient who takes our oil. One of our biggest things that we've tried to accomplish is the bioavailability in our cannabinoid extracts and using full plants for our extract and not isolates or any other types of distillation processes.
Awesome, thanks. So we're going to jump right in, and let me just frame the first topic of conversation that we're going to go over with the panelists here. We hear a lot of terms out there in this new market. Cannabis is new, CBD is new. You know, CBD is that one cannabinoid that we're allowed to talk about nationally and not just in the regulated states. And so the misinformation is real. You've probably heard full spectrum, broad spectrum, whole plant, distillate, isolate, terpenes, re-added terpenes, cannabis-based terpenes. There's all these terms floating out there, but what does that all mean? Well, we have this plant. To me, hemp, from the federal definition, is just more slander. It's arbitrary. I think that if we leave this room with one thing, say cannabis for everything or say hemp for everything, your choice. If you want to say hemp for everything, there's a hemp varietal that grows oil, and usually farmers want to make it seedless because it's going to have more oil production. That oil presents as these trichomes and oil glands that protect the plant. On the other side, we have another plant that wants to grow much drier, less oil, usually taller, much more fibrous and stalk, right? Typically, farmers will let that get seeded because that seed has value. When we talk about the medicinal varietal, agnostic of cannabinoids, it is possible to grow that right varietal with less than 0.03% THC, therefore it's CBD rich, and as well with all the other cannabinoids and terpenes that are typically present in the cannabis plant. So that's the right cultivar. So now that we understand that, forget what the feds are telling us, we want the right cultivar, right? We want that cultivar that is growing oil, medicine oil, more oil, at least 20% oil by weight, right? That's where the medicine is. The medicine is not in the flower or not in the leaf, not in the stalk. It is in fact in the flower, but that protective oil, those oil glands that protect the flower. That being said, I'm going to ask the panelists what, in their opinion, is whole flower extract, right? I think you've heard some of them say it. What is their version of whole plant and maybe full spectrum, and how does that differ from distillate? We'll just hear from their perspective, and then perhaps I'll color it in and keep the conversation moving. So why don't I start first with Nicole, because her company focuses on whole plant, and so she can explain to us how important that is.
Thank you. So yeah, we actually don't do any extracts or isolates, and countrywide we're very unique because most people are focused on extracting something out of the plant. They're really focused on the cannabinoids, and they don't realize that the whole plant, when you eat it in its whole raw form, that it's natural to your body. Your body accepts it, like when you eat a whole orange, right? So like think about eating a whole orange or taking an emergency packet. That whole orange or an orange and a kiwi is going to give you a lot more vitamin C than that so-called 1,000 milligram emergency packet because it's not bioavailable. That's just crap, so don't take that. If you're sick, take a real orange. Everything's in that orange that is meant, your body recognizes it as the whole plant. So that's why we like to just start with the flower, and we have a proprietary process. It doesn't take anything out. It keeps it raw, doesn't even heat it up, and turns it into a bright green powder. And then you can take that powder and ingest it and get all of the medical benefits of cannabis that you know without any psychoactivity if you're worried about that part. Full spectrum extract is when you can take a flower and soak it directly into oil and get, basically that's what they call like a full spectrum extract, and it contains like coconut oil. So you take a flower, put it in coconut oil, and then strain that out, and that oil will contain most of the particulates that are found in the plant. You're not going to actually be ingesting the whole plant though. And then CBD isolate, they actually go through and they use heat and pressure and time and solvents to take out everything else out of the plant to leave this white powder, like you've seen just like vitamin C powder that you see in a lab, or maybe even sugar. It's just this one molecule out of the plant, and so it's not bioavailable anymore. The bioavailability goes down to 6%. So if you take 1,000 milligrams, you're gonna get 60 if you're healthy. What's the point? So I think that ingesting the whole flower, you're gonna get up to 98% bioavailability. That means that your body absorbs it, you feel it, and you feel it quickly. You don't have to wait, you don't have to take it for 30 to 60 days or anything like that. So.
Awesome, Jesse, I think, why don't you give us your perspective and how you guys are doing it?
Yeah, sure. So we are using a whole plant extract, but it does go through a winterization process where we take out some of the waxes, so it's not as dark and waxy. It's a little bit more user friendly, but we still keep all of those different terpenes and cannabinoids from the whole plant in there.
Awesome.
Yes, so we've developed also too a proprietary technology to include everything in the plant. And I think when we talk about full spectrum isolates and broad spectrum, there's a big misconception of that. Oh, if you have a distillate and you put a distillate inside a formulation and you add terpenes back into it, you now have a full spectrum. But that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of other constituents in the cannabis plant that are vital to the processing in our body through our lymphatic system. When we isolate it down, it has to process directly through our livers. In that, we only have a certain amount of enzymes that process those. Typically, people who are seeking out CBDs have other medical elements that they're taking prescription medication for, which we could then see the counterindications between the CBD isolates and those medications. Whereas if you're using a true full spectrum, like Popcorn Barclays and Eva, then you'll be able to utilize the cannabinoids through the lymphatic system in the most efficient way to get into and stimulate the endocannabinoid system.
Awesome. So, the interesting thing about whole plant medicine versus isolate is isolate really represents single API, which is pharma's way of doing things. Like we find, oh, this is the active pharmaceutical ingredient. Let's get it out of the plant, similar to willow bark being aspirin. So that's fine, that's an approach. Then we take that API and we run it through tests and we see what it can do, and maybe we get some efficacy, typically, we get some side effects, and that's how we've done it thus far. Pharma professionals would tell you that plant-based medicine is inconsistent because every crop is different. Well, I say that, going to distinct API, single API has some inconsistencies in the form of side effects, but when we're talking here about whole plant versus full spectrum, what does that mean? Well, I'll speak from my perspective from Popcorn Barclay. We make it a mission to not use anything but just the flower and flower derivatives. So whether we press that, squeeze out the rosin, or shake the keef off of it and press that, or soak it directly in a lipid, those are the only ways we're going to get the oil out of that plant, right? Because those are the most natural, basic processes. We like to say that what got our movement here over the last 2 decades are simple things that were grown in garages and formulated in kitchens. That's the efficacy that people have risked incarceration to get at this medicine. And so I'd like to understand that first. That's our company's value proposition. But more broadly, CBD is coming into the marketplace as a natural medicine, right? That's how it's being billed. But when we talk about CBD distillate, that tends to be more on that pharma model and not on the holistic plant model. We should really think, in my opinion, about CBD as a plant-based medicine, and then, well, if that's the case, to Nicole's point, should we not have whole plant medicines that include chlorophyll, which is great internally and topically. Maybe not so to smoke, but topically and internally, those chlorophylls, those plant fats, those phytonutrients, they all play in. Now, do they vary batch to batch? Yes, every plant, every cultivar. Is it hard for us in our nascent industry to make sure that we have consistent strains? Yes, but cannabis is about lending yourself into it and finding that medicine, finding what works for you, and that inconsistency at the plant level we can work out with just paying a little attention. The good thing is about that whole plant is there is no side effects. Right now, one thing we know somewhat definitively from anecdotal evidence is there's real little downside to taking cannabis and cannabis-based products, right? Especially full spectrum ones. So this leads us to the next topic that we wanted to discuss with the group. We have these different forms of making oils and extracting oils. We have different ways of tinctures, of smokes, of vapes, of topicals, of capsules. But really, I think Nicole was talking about this. uptake, bioavailability, those are things that are not being messaged in the education yet, and they're very important. It doesn't matter if it says, well, right now in the CBD industry, especially if you go to like, Amazon or these websites, you're not even seeing CBD. You're seeing hemp oil, and you have no idea how much active is in that, right? So right there, that starts to throw off the curve. We don't even have the right nomenclature, or we're not having consistent nomenclature or having a real conversation on the national side, so that makes it really difficult. But let's say you do know how much CBD is in your product, that's only the tip of the iceberg. You then have to know, is it in a form that is bioavailable in general, and then for me specifically, right? Some people may not vibe with the MCT oil. It may not have the right uptake for them. The fruit analogy is a great one. It's like, I think most people are still on the Sunny D. During my presentation, I have a slide that's like Sunny D and an orange juice. And if you've had the best orange juice, okay, it's good, but you go to one of those places that has the squeezing things, or you squeeze yours, it's a whole different product, right? To Nicole's point, it's like, it's way different when it's the whole thing, right? We know this from other natural products, so we should be demanding that in our plant-based medicines, and now in the national conversation, it's not exactly that. But anyway, getting back to the point, nutrient uptake and how important that is and how that relates to dosing, I'll start with, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting everybody's name. I'll start with Jesse. Give us your experience on the bioavailability of different products and how people can start to make better choices.
Bioavailability. Okay. To start with, I think a lot of people don't even understand the dose that they're taking. I think I read over 50% of Americans have no idea how much CBD they're taking. They're definitely not going to know how much of it's bioavailable. I think every patient is different, and there is a lot of trial and error. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Well, it's your opinion on cannabinoid uptake, or when a person is taking in CBD. To your point, you're coming out with a 10,000 milligram bottle to make sure that folks are getting enough CBD. So first, I'm assuming your product says CBD and probably tells an individual that on their metered dose in their dropper, 1 milliliter is X amount. Why do they need more? From your perspective.
From my perspective, I actually suspect a lot of people are not taking enough CBD. It's a very personal thing. 30 milligrams, 50 milligrams a day might work for someone. If you have autoimmune diseases, you might need more. I started, they say start low, go slow. And I was taking maybe 30, 50 milligrams a day and not having a ton of success. And I started reading, kind of educating myself and reading that a lot of people with autoimmune diseases take more like 100, 200, 300 milligrams a day. And I thought, well, heck, let's try it. I mean, I'm on all these different pharmaceuticals. My rheumatologist wanted to put me back on chemo this spring. And so I started ordering more and more CBD and kind of upped it to 100. And then I started feeling some effects. So then I wasn't having any bad side effects with it, so I kept upping it a little more, and I found my sweet spot is more around the 250, 300 milligram range. And what I like about our product is that it is, 10,000 milligrams a bottle, and so every milliliter is 100, and so it's easy for me to space that out during the day. The idea is really activating your endocannabinoid system frequently and finding out how much it takes to activate your body. So for me, I've been taking about 50 milligrams 6 times a day. I found that spacing it out seems to be the magic formula for me. I've read anything from 15 to 38 milligrams is necessary to actually activate your endocannabinoid system. More research is definitely needed to find out sort of what the sweet spot is.
Awesome. So Jimmy, your perspective on bioavailability?
Sure. It breaks down to a couple things. We talked about the isolates and the full spectrum. The other thing too is this. How many people in this room have been sick and only have one thing wrong with them when they're sick? You only have a stuffy nose, or you only have a headache. Nobody, right? Same thing when we're battling diseases. There's always multiple things going on. Cannabinoids are an adaptogen. They go to the very most important thing first, and then they start working on other things. So everybody is individual, have individual things going on with themselves. So I believe that titrating and utilizing, full spectrum and cannabinoid profiles will allow for the body to utilize them more efficiently, whereas just having a pure CBD. And this is where the other cannabinoids come in, CBC, CBGs, these other cannabinoids that we're really not even talking about now. There's over 128 cannabinoids, and in California we only test for 23 of them. So there's a lot missing here. So isolating them and sticking them all in singular compartments is definitely going to cause people to have to use higher dosages of the CBDs, whereas if you're using a combination of all the cannabinoids, you can really dose yourself a little bit lower. But I agree, I think that people in general are not getting enough cannabinoids in their system at all, and to re-stimulate and balance out our endocannabinoid system to get it back to homeostasis, it does require a lot more medicine than what we're traditionally being told we need to have.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is because it's also such a hot commodity, was prohibited for so long, and so I think sometimes even in pricing, it's a little bit much, and that'll help as we get more regulated. But Nicole, your thoughts on bioavailability and cannabinoid uptake?
So I know I talked about the flower powder, the whole plant flower just ground down into a powder is about 98% bioavailable, and that goes back to food science. So when you eat something that's a whole plant, you're going to absorb most of it. But when you eat something that's processed and broken down, your body's going to pass most of it. So personally, I tried using CBD oil, and I would spend $500 a month trying to use different CBD oils before I was able to formulate and found out what the acidic cannabinoids is what's actually works for me and is more bioavailable for me, and is when you keep them acidic and raw, it's actually more water soluble for your body, and our DNA is encapsulated in water. So when you start to put it in a fat, then as Jimmy said earlier, it's got to go through the liver. You're gonna reduce your bioavailability. So why not just use cannabis juice, or just pick the flower, like you pick an orange or an apple off the tree. Go ahead, grow a plant, pick the flower, and eat it if you really want to be healthy.
Well said. So you're hearing it a little bit. I'm sure you guys have heard the term entourage effect. Best way to describe the entourage effect is if you were looking at a picture of a symphony, you can see each individual instrument. If you're really good, you can almost hear that one instrument, but really what you feel is the symphony of all those instruments playing. One of them turns off, slightly changes it, but is supported by the larger group. One by itself definitely doesn't resonate. One instrument by itself, even at the solo, doesn't resonate like the entire group. Same thing with like a chorus versus a singular voice. So you hear that a little bit from the panel. The entourage effect, is important. We know that even how cannabinoids work in our body, they work in concert in changing the receptor's shape so that we have better locking key and cohesion. That's definitely true of THC and CBD, how they work. As we're talking about, this uptake in the bioavailability, the next subject really is dosing. But the interesting thing that's happening on the CBD marketplace is because of misinformation, right? We have 3 panelists here, and they all are basically they can have different products, and you need to know what that product is and how it works for you from a dosing perspective based on like a certain bioavailability. And then we have the titration question, right? Which is like, okay, people don't even think about cannabis as a regimen. Like most of it think of it as a one-hit wonder. That's a legacy from Prohibition. When the reality is you should be taking it multiple times a day, at least I take CBD every evening. I'm about to be 50 and I just went motocrossing for the first time, and I still beat myself up, but I take it regularly. I have no idea. I've been taking it for a while, so I have no idea what would happen if I don't take it. So I just, and I personally take 60 milligrams every night, just as an analgesic, because I believe that CBD loads in our fat cells, and the first autoimmune disease is inflammation. While you need inflammation sometimes, usually when you think about arthritis, when you think about like a back, it's your body causing more inflammation. CBD, we know factually, lowers the precursor to inflammation. So it stops systemically throughout your body from inflaming. So that's why older folks, when they cotton on to CBD and they're like, oh my God, for the first time I can move my hands, that's what it is. But that's not overnight. Typically, when we at Pop and Barkley, when we ask folks to start our CBD regimen, we say give it 7 days. Take it every evening. Yes, CBD can have some sedentary effects, or is that right? Sedation, can make you tired. And you need to start, I always recommend in the evening, start slow, start low, go slow, and understand where you are. As Jimmy said, typically if, when you have an ailment, cannabinoids are going to work on that first. All analgesics are the same way. If you take too much of them, there will be some side effect. In our case, THC, CBD, and cannabinoids, typically it's sleepiness, sometimes paranoia, but mostly sleepiness and sluggishness. And so we just have to find how much do we need for our ailment and well-being, and then how much is too much, right? Even when it comes to sleep regulation. So moving on to the panel, from this concept of uptake to dosing, we're talking about it. It's hard to talk about dosing without understanding the product, right? Because again, if we're using an isolate, we're probably gonna take a bunch of it. If we're using something that's mixed ratio, maybe we need less of it. If it's something that's in alcohol versus MCT oil versus a capsule, how bioavailable they are, those kinds of things. So I'm gonna start with Jimmy. If you could just, enlighten us on your experience on titration, so taking it regularly in terms of microdosing, which is popular, as well as understanding that, the product that you get the next time, how you start to get your cannabis legs, if you will, from dosing.
Sure, that's a great question. And to just touch on what Guy was saying is that I think there's a big misconception right now about how to utilize cannabinoids, right? We utilize them when we get sick, when something happens to us, when we get hurt. But really, we have a system in our body, the endocannabinoid system, and our adipose tissue stores cannabinoids for when we need it. So utilizing it regularly as a preventative is amazing for our body, keeping the inflammation down. Most diseases, autoimmune disease, cancers, other diseases are inflammatory diseases. So always keeping the inflammation down in the body, even in our diets, the foods that we eat in our diets to help keep the inflammation down is really key to a healthy life. And so what that brings me to is when you first start out with cannabinoids, titration is the best thing to do. Start out low and increase. Keep going up until you figure out what your dosage and what your regular regimen should be. And also to experiment, this is your body. I'm not a physician. I'm not going to tell you how to treat your own body. The one thing that I always encourage people to do is take a look at themselves and see what they need inside them. Don't rely on somebody else. Be your own doctor, be your own healer. You have the ability to heal yourself. Cannabinoids are a great tool to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. When we were talking in the green room getting ready, we definitely want to mention to the group that personalized medicine is definitely hand in hand with cannabis. You do need to know your own body. Most of us wait until we have a crazy ailment before we study up on it, right? And most people that end up getting out of an autoimmune disease or cancer or something have to really self-educate. I don't say this disparaging against traditional Western doctors, but we definitely have built a culture of being told what's wrong with us or told what's wrong with our body. It's like Jimmy's like, I'm not a physician, so I can't tell you. Well, I would argue that a physician shouldn't tell you. Could advise you, could hear your symptoms, but it's for you to get your education game up, right? It's like if it's beyond the flu, you should immediately, especially in the day of the internet, get some advice from your physician and then crack the books and start to understand, based on your reading and what you feel internally, where you're at. Right? I think that cannabis as a movement is going to bring a little bit more personalized medicine. I think the answer there is that personalization is what mitigates the inconsistency of plant-based medicine. So we've had this pharma model that just hands us pills. Side effects, whatever, just take it, come back in a couple weeks, I'll give you one for the side effect. That's been the model. You don't need to do anything. Don't read anything, I'll just tell you. On the other side, we have this plant-based medicine that, changes and varies, but we're asking folks to step up and lend themselves to the process, go slow, maybe take in the evening. The cool thing about natural medicines is there is a low toxicity, so we don't have to worry about side effects. So we should lean into them and experiment with them. Pain management is a great example. The chemotherapy is a great example where, we are so quick to jump to opiates when really cannabis is a great pain manager. It's also a great antidepressant. So typically in chemo, you get your pain manager and your antidepressant, because I don't know if most of you know, chronic pain usually has a depressive component to it, right? So typically, when you hear opioids, what you're not hearing is the antidepressant in the form of Xanax and so on that people are also being prescribed in our nation, where cannabinoids and cannabis literally split that, give you both sides of that coin, never mind just the anti-nausea as it relates to chemo and the increase of appetite. But going back to the dosing, I know Jesse, dosing is a topic, and you kind of already articulated how you started. If you were giving advice to somebody, just I guess recount how you would go about it again. Like, I'm in the dispensary for the first time, I have no idea what I'm looking at, but I want to start dosing.
Right, okay.